Let's see the spinning wheel. We're there. Richard, welcome to the show. Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
Well, now, so for those in the audience, this is Richard. And I gotta say, Richard, we don't do sales on. I like, what is that? The razor. It's about time somebody made a phone that fit in my pocket again. so I'm liking what your engineers are doing over there. It looks really nice with the folding screen, etc. But you know, the challenge that I have, and this is kind of funny, it's ridiculous because I'm in technology, but I've been on iOS so many years. It's like, oh, do I have to learn another system, right? I know it's just Android and it's probably very intuitive, just like iOS is. But it's an interesting point. In fact, before we get going, because I think we should get going on that subject matter, you know, people, it's just like, oh, one more thing for the CPU to handle. I just don't want to do it, so I'll stick with iOS. But it's coming. I want a phone that fits in my pocket, so I have to learn something new. I'm waiting for the CPU cycles to be freed up. It never happens, right? I'm always just wall to wall every day, working. I never get those cycles. So perhaps we can talk about that in a little bit here. You know, what is it with users in which, you know, we might fall down because there's a new button to click or a new thing to learn? That might be an interesting subject. But before we get started, please introduce yourself for the sake of our audience. Just 20 seconds on who is Richard Rushing.
Sure. My name is Richard Rushing. I am Chief Information Security Officer for Motorola Mobility. I've been Motorola Mobility's CISO now for 13 years, which is like I should have died like 3 or 4 times. The CISO years are even shorter and more exponential than dog years are per se. That's there. I've been in the security business pretty much almost all my life, even before. I've done startups as well as work for global Fortune 50 organizations on this side of it. Yeah, I'm a technologist. I love tech, whether it's computers, devices, wearables, IoT, all of those things fascinate me to no end. I started really young age. First pen test that I actually did was for, and this will date me. People are like, "Oh wow, pen test." I'm like, "This didn't involve any network scanning. It just trying to figure out the password to the voting bank at the regional bank that was there." So that was my first pen test. How good can you guess a password that was automotive for a financial institution? So literally, I've been doing this for a really long time. I enjoy it. I enjoy speaking to people on this subject matter and everything else.
Well, you're at the right outfit, considering it sounds like you're a real gadget geek, right? So hopefully they let you play with all of their toys and test them in early development. That'll be right.
Oh, yeah.
Good man. So, Rich, this is our second session on the ESI ThoughtLab's documentation and research. And for those who aren't familiar with it, here's a bit of a recap. And so ESI ThoughtLabs, which is a think tank, did a research study on 1,009 enterprise companies, their CISOs, all the way through the organization to the security department, to understand what are the CISOs who are doing it right doing, right? You know, what are these? And so it's my understanding you participated in this study as one of those CISOs, as one of those organizations. It's a very rich study, and in the 20 minutes today, we're going to pick up a couple of highlighted points from that study for us to discuss. And I think we should start with the whole dialogue that I was just mentioning. It's just an interesting observation to me that the thing that holds me back, and I'm a gadget geek too, I love this kind of technology, right? I see this new phone that you guys have worked on, the folding screen and all that, looks really cool. At the end of the day, I really only use my phone for phone, text, email, and that's about it, right? Yeah, maybe navigation with Google Maps. So I just want a done-ish phone that fits into my pocket, but I won't switch because it's just another new thing to learn. How much do you think that is a problem for people in an organization where you as the CISO say, hey, look, you know, there's a new button, you've got to toggle this, you know, keep your S3 containers default closed in AWS. Make sure you toggle that button. Right, but people don't do it because it's just extra stuff. Let's talk about that a little bit. What are your thoughts around that, Richard?
I think there's a couple of different areas. Change in general to people really scare people. change is reluctant. If you look at it and say, I have 3 magic levers I can do in pretty much any organization. It's people, the processes, and the technology. People don't like to change processes because that involves more change. People and people, it's like, oh, we don't have the right person. Let's get somebody else. The changing of the people is not any easier. It's usually the technology button people want to go push or pull to say, hey, we're not doing this. Let's add technology to the stack. And it's part of that arena, and it's something that we are kind of self-defeating ourselves with, because I can hand a tablet to a 3-year-old and they have never seen it before, and they will figure it out very quickly on how to use it and what to actually do it, just by, hey, doing it. And I think it's not the fact that there's feature to feature, oh, I'm missing something here, or it's not the same way. It's the way it's done. And that's part of the human resistance to change, of like, I've always did it this way, I want to do it. But that effort at that point in time now becomes a move that's there. And typically, in a lot of cases, you need a critical thing to be able to say, yeah, this is the direction I want to go. And it's the same thing. We saw it in the world of like DevOps and some of the other stuff from that area, where it's just like, if you ever started a DevOps program and started running it, typically the first one you did failed miserably at some point in time because it was changed to the whole development team. This is not the way I did it. This is not my way to do it. And then as you did the next one, okay, it worked better. And then the following one was actually working really good and was better than the waterfall or whatever kind of development methodology you were using. So I think that's one of the things, is that you really have to know that the change is going to be hard for people and build things into that change program. And you talked about moving from phones to everything else. There's plenty of articles, and we see it in all directions, of one to the other or anything else, to say, hey, if you've used this and you're moving to the other operating system environment, and the same could be said for PCs, the same could be said for anything, here is kind of the first things you need to do, or here is a user experience. Give me to say that. So someone sat down and thought about it and does it. I think that's the key thing. Anytime you're trying to do change, you need to go down and go, how is this going to be different for my users to be able to do that? And how am I going to communicate it clearly and concisely to them so that they can actually benefit from it? And a lot of times it's like, your point, I only have some hours in a day, so it can't be 8 hours of training. It needs to be something that's really short and sweet to get the point across that's there.
That's right. If you can't tell me in 30 seconds or less, I just don't have time for it. And you mentioned a couple of really interesting things about communicating with the users there, but also communicating with leadership, because you said, when you start with your DevOps, at first it's not that good. I like to say to my kids, your first attempt is your worst attempt. So let's talk about that relational structure in a few moments. But to finish off with what we were discussing here, this is from the ESI study. And so I'll read a little bit because I realize I'm blocking a small portion of the slide. But this was interesting to me. So what the survey did out of 1,009 corporations is they said, okay, in regards to internal versus external threat actors, which pose the highest risks? And this is just raw data from the study. I find it super interesting. Cyber criminals. And what people need to realize is these are criminal syndicates. They're very well organized. They have CEOs, CFOs, quality assurance, SLAs to their exploit kits. These are businesses. Hackers and thrill seekers, but keep going down. Look at that. Careless or untrained insiders. 29% of breaches, right? 20% of breaches, or pose the highest risk. Yeah, pose the highest risk, right? So 29% of organizations said, yeah, careless or untrained insiders. This is not malicious intent, right? This is over a quarter, almost a third.
Yeah, this is not the insider threat. This is just somebody that doesn't know better or wasn't trained in that. And we see that time and time again. Cloud strategies, there's major multitudes of different cloud providers. Each one does something different. And a lot of times organization goes, oh, you're used to doing things in the cloud. It's like programming. Oh, you used to know C#, so therefore you can program in C#. And it's like, no, oh, you can do Python now. And it's like, whoa, 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 wait, I don't know Python, but you know this other language. Clouds is the same way. hey, you know how to use AWS, Azure, GCP, that you can transfer that knowledge from one to the other, and that's part of the issue that doesn't happen in a lot of cases that are there. When I first started uh, uh, doing cybersecurity and at scale in the late 80s, everything else, training was so important. In other words, if I got a new firewall, I needed to be trained and certified on it that was actually there from the vendor and everything else. And now you see that you have more people that are, hey, I'm not really trained. I just sat down and I did a knowledge transfer, and so you're not getting the full impact of a lot of these tools of like, hey, now it's our product's easy enough. We don't even have training on that side of it. You click on that, and that's portions of the stuff of like, how do I learn to be able to do it and become self-sufficient on that? And in the pandemic age, critical, who's my second? Because again, if you lose your first, okay, where's the second at that point in time that's actually there? Again, we've seen that of that the resiliency also now goes to people, because you discover things like biometric authentication. Oh, that's really cool and really fun, except when the person's not able to give you their biometric fingerprint anymore. Now, how do I get into a room? How do I get into some of the other stuff that's actually there? So that's a process that it definitely is not available.
Yeah, so the problem, the human problem, is that we take people, we give them. This is a real bee in my bonnet, by the way. I love this subject matter. We give them interval training, so we tell them once, hey man, toggle that button, right? Make sure you do that. We've got a new system coming in. Let's give you a workshop for a day, or go get this cert, and then come back again. Well, we all know this. We all know that the average human being remembers 5 to 7 things for 20 minutes and then forgets them. Right? And so we test immediately after training, so it's while it's fresh in the mind, but you don't get that rote memory, you don't get habit, you don't get instinctual behavior, right, from interval type engagement. You get it from daily drilling, from discipline. So this is and here's what's interesting too. You also mentioned that you've got all of these various, so you learn all these different programs. Well, we're never going to be able to do without, or at least let me ask you, as the CISO, are we going to be able to do without open source? Because I found this a fascinating statistic, right? Open source software platforms as a high security risk. What are your thoughts around this? I mean, we're saying 53% of respondents, of which you were in this survey, said open source software and platforms. Big loss for me today. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think that goes back to some of the things that people are now creating more software that's there. You used to have these things called application rationalization, where you would, like, we have 800 apps, we want to move to 600 apps. What are we doing with that? But I think we see it now is that people are creating these microservices, different things that are designed to run very smallly, and they're using open source software. It used to be like, well, if I don't have the code, then how am I going to do this? And I think now people are using libraries, people are using functions, people are now gravitating to bring this in. The issue that you get into that you always do, and then that side of it, it's not just your software, it's the third party software, it's your supplier software, it's other people's software that now does business reasons and things like that, that are all part of this. And we've gone through multiple black swan events like OpenSSL and things like that. The software has been around for years and finally gets looked at and goes, oh my gosh, there's problems with it, and then they get fixed. But I think that's part of the issue, is that there is I don't want to say a quality control with open source, but there is no oversight that is really designed to look from it from a security standpoint or performance standpoint. It's really from a functionality standpoint that it was driven for, and that's what it's being used for today.
How much of this, and by the way, what's a black swan event, Richard?
So a black swan event is like, oh, how do you get a black swan? It's one of these events that comes up that's only supposed to happen, like the 100-year flood, the 35-year rainstorm. It's the same thing. It's only supposed to happen once, and you end up with like these stacking up in some of the cases that are actually there.
You're the guy that needs to ensure that we cater to black swan events, right? That's plan. Yeah, exactly. Well, and so beautiful. And maybe this, or let me ask you this question: how much of that, right, relates to patching from open source? Because I find these mildly staggering statistics if I sort of move out
Yeah.
of the way a little bit,
So,
right?
so especially when you go into patching and some of the other stuff, one, you need to know that the software is actually used, and in some of the cases, you need to know like what's your build cycle? Where does the builds come from? Are you pulling the latest and greatest or not? Because a lot of times developers are like, "Hey, this works. Why do I need to update it and break something?" Or be reluctant to actually do that. So again, back to our original argument, there's some training involved in it, but at the same time, there's a huge lift that's going to go into that area that's actually there. And I think that's some of the areas, but trying to patch it, one, you have to know what open source libraries and open source software is actually being used in your organization. And then how is it being used and who's doing the updating? Is it a person? Do you pull? Is that your policy? Or is it, hey, we look once every quarter for new updates, etc.? Or, hey, you posted this and we're concerned because we use this library around it. What does it mean? And in a lot of cases that are actually there. And we see that. So there's a lot of people aspect to it because, yeah, you could potentially break things. And you see it with some of the frameworks. It's like, oh, we want to move from this version of PHP to this version of PHP. Okay, our website now is completely destroyed, and thank you for making me update. It's not a good way to make friends if you're not careful in a lot of cases around that. But the question is it vulnerable? You need to address those vulnerabilities in that side.
Now, you mentioned frameworks. I don't have a slide for this, but I remember reading in the reports that NIST was used as one, but kind of a main framework. It's got an almost international. It's a good framework, but that let's call it the enlightened CISO uses that as a real base model, right? That's the bare minimum. Give me your
It's
thoughts around it.
it's a framework. Think of it as a frame of a house. There are no walls. There's just things that are stood up, and you've got to fill in the blanks with the rest of that for your organization. And unfortunately, a lot of people are like, "Hey, I checked off my thing," and I'm like, "That's good. You don't have a roof. You don't have windows. You don't have anything. You just have a framework that's actually there." You really need to flush that and put that into the organization to do it. It's a guideline that's simply there. It doesn't involve, hey, I need to teach people, I need to enforce it, I need to verify, etc. with that. That's not portion of the process. Having a checkbox that said, I asked him and he said they did it, doesn't really necessarily always bode well for the outcome.
Let me ask you this question. This before we start talking about, we're going to end on kind of reporting structure to CISO to the CEO, those kinds of things. I'll put a slide in a moment. I'm going to ask you a cheeky question though, Richard. So how much do you think that the business side of the house, the CEOs, think that cyber is still just a checkbox as far as these kinds of frameworks? I mean, a cheeky question, but are we maturing on the business side of the house to say, yes, I fully support you guys, or you guys are just scary and you think the world's collapsing all the time?
No, I think it's one of the key areas that you see. I've always classified over the last couple of years, this is the golden age of cyber, and people look at me like, what the world are you thinking about? Because this is not if your definition of golden age fits into the 2020 scenario going really well, but the rest of the time, not so much. But what I mean by that is most of my life has always been convincing executives that there is a problem and it needs to be addressed. Now that's done. There's not a thing. They're concerned that the problem that X, Y, and Z company had, we haven't. Is this something that's going to affect us? And I think that's an area that gets into focus at that point in time. And I think that's a super issue that's there is you're going with it, and they already know about it. So the education level, the risk, and everything else, they understand. It's now the next level. What are you doing about it, and can you measure what you're doing about it? I think that becomes the critical portion of that. That's there. Of hey, most CEOs will like, what do you need? How is this there? Because they understand when they see organizations get completely inundated with ransomware and they have to shut global things down, or they have a multi-million record data breach in this area. They know whatever cost that was trying to be saved, or reluctance of adding people, or overhead in a process is now a mute point, doesn't exist anymore. How do I proceed around that? And I think that's good, but also remember that you can get what you wish for. So when they offer you the blank check to say go fix, understand that check comes with a lot of strings attached to it in a lot of cases. So be wary of like, hey, here's a lot of money to go spend. Well, they expect results when you spend. They expect, hey, what our profile is and things around that. So that's something else that comes to the area when you're now investing in an organization. You need to be able to show things, and I think that's part of the reporting structure that's there as well. Is that, yeah, you can get the access to it. You have a seat at the table now, which people were wanting, but that seat at the table before, when you were at the, I don't want to say kids table, but a secondary table, it was someone else's responsibility and you could pass the buck. In other words, you can say, hey, it's the businesses, they have to make the decision about the risk and everything else. When you're sitting at the table, that decision relies upon you. And that may not be comfortable for people in some cases, because before, I could deflect, I could point, it's not mine. You guys want to go crazy and do this. Yeah. If you guys want to, it's your decision. I'm out of it. Now you're at the table. It's your decision as part of that process. That's why you're at the table, is to make the decision. Just like the chief marketing officer, the sales, engineering are all there to make the same decisions. It's your turn to make the decision. Secure, can you make it secure, etc.
Be careful what we ask for, right?
Yeah, very careful.
You're framing it like that. I would agree with you. It is the golden age of cyber, and there are so many places we could go with this study from that. Now, unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I'll throw a teaser out for the ladies and gentlemen in the audience, because one of the slides I'm looking at right here, I won't show it now, so we're going to wrap on this subject matter that you brought up. But there are so many places we could pivot with this study. 1,009 enterprise corporations is a big study. And by the way, there is an ebook that is available on this platform. You can click, I think it's somewhere, it's called attachments in Bright Talk, and then you'll click to get the ebook. Otherwise, you can find me easily. I've got an unusual name, Edwin Doyle Manhattan on LinkedIn. I'm the only one. So you can find me and ask me for the ebook, and I'll send it to you. But one of the things was interesting. CISOs say cybersecurity offers business benefits. And so when we start maturing into not just a cost center, but something that is generating revenue or is saving revenue, it's going to be a completely different dialogue for us. But let's end here then, because you were talking about that relationship with the CEO. Now, I wrote a blog about a year and a half ago, where should the CISO report? And I was arguing a case, as most of the CISOs I was dealing with report to the CIO. And my argument was this: 20 years ago, the CIO type skill set reported to facilities management. They were pulling cable and installing fax machines and printers. Ludicrous today to have a CIO report to facilities management, report to the CEO. I think it's the same. We're in the same level of maturity with the CISO. You need to move out from under the CIO, report to the CEO. Right? It's a risk dialogue. It's not a product. It's not a technology dialogue. It's a risk dialogue. Then I read this from the study, and I think this is where we should end. I'll look, by the way, I hope my friends at Checkpoint are watching this. If there are any questions, please send them to me on my mobile or through the chat on the platform, because we're going to end in a few moments. Now look at this. CISOs are increasingly reporting to CEOs. I'll move out of the way a little bit so the audience can read this. So we've got, in the Americas, 65% of CISOs reporting to the CEO now. Blew my mind, Richard. Let's wrap with your thoughts around this, and we'll wish everybody a good day. And there's so much else to talk about. We've got to end at some point.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think the reporting structure, and I have some areas of that. Yes, at a level that the CEO needs to report, or the CISO needs to report into the executive level at that point. It provides credence and everything else. It's different in organizations, but if you ask to do something and everything else is there, it's not a necessity. I think it's one of the things. If you have someone you report to that supports you and works well with you, and again, that working relationship is key. I would much rather have a good, solid working relationship with somebody than have a very limited scoping kind of thing that's actually there. That's there. You know when you arrived, when you happen to come in and the CEO is waiting for you in your office, you were like, okay, you came and sought me out. Why is this the problem? You know, at that point in time, you're good. You don't have to worry about anything. But I think one of the big things that people always ask us is that you have the conflict. And I think the biggest conflict that's around there are the dollars, the money that's spent. If you can talk and get your budget moved out, have a separate budget line item that you can control, it's amazing how that structure doesn't matter at that point in time, because that's really what is there is like, hey, IT takes a cut, therefore security is going to take a cut as well. And that in this day and age of everything else, that is not a really good benefit that's around that. And I think that's kind of the golden key, that if you're able to push that and you're able to encompass that, I think at that point in time, you could report to anyone. As long as you had that, you can control pretty much your own destiny and are looked at. Now, it's really what that person does and working with the business. And does he pretty much work well with the business, or is he clashing with the business? And you can have both and be successful, but the issue is you have to work well in the business environment and the model that's there. Otherwise, you're just kind of an additive process. You have to be the change agent for the organization that was there, because you're changing a lot of people behavior. And we talked about it. And the reluctance of that comes back to that of like, you have to be the change agent that's there. You got to teach people, and you see it from, hey, don't click on phishing links. Don't look at this, do that. You're the driving change agent usually in the organization for the most dramatic change that's going to occur, whether it's from a developer, whether it's from a salesperson entering new data, all that is going to be under your thing. So use that to your advantage and own it at that point in time. You'll be surprised how successful you are.
Wow, words of the wise from a seasoned veteran, ladies and gentlemen. That's the human factor in play there, and nothing beats experience, Richard. So listen, Richard, thank you so much for being on this call, helping the world become a safer place online. That is our mantra. Ladies and gentlemen, this is part of a 4-part series. Next time, July 15th, we have Frank Rausch hosting. I'll be on the other side, on Richard's side of the conversation, along with some other folks. So look out for an invite, or look out in social media for that. I would love to continue this conversation. The way I would love to continue it is in a public forum over LinkedIn. So again, seek me out. It's easy enough, and I'll put a post up. Richard's very active on LinkedIn. He's a strong community player. We've sat on similar panels and discussions together, and he's all over the place. And so I would love to continue this conversation. If you have questions for us, please ask them in that public forum. Let's help solve these problems together. With that, again, Richard, I'm very grateful, my friend. Stay safe.
Thank you as always. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure. So take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Stay safe, everyone. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.